All right, so we're going to talk about the train that Abby got out of the station here, and we're going to piggyback right on that. I'm not going to use the word metagame because it's like sort of an evil bad word, and I actually agree with Abby that we maybe need to confront that as a word that is used to mean some of the other things that we mean when we use other words. So we'll try to talk a little bit about that. If I push this middle button, is that what makes it?
It's a laser. It's the right button.
Oh, I'm going to shoot in people's eyes if I... All right, so the radical notion that players are people that we heard from John and from Abby and the others, they're not customers, they're not pawns to be manipulated by a GM. LARP came off the table in the United States, and we sometimes still think that they're manipulatives that can be brought into conflict with each other or into a grand melee at the end. They're not even their characters, because characters are constructs that are embodied by people. These are people with individual lived experiences that make them wonderful and unique, and they bring these fantastic things into the game and come up with ideas that we didn't even think of. And this enriches the experience for everyone, but it also means that they need to be seen and recognized for the real people that they are, people who exist before the game and after the game. All right, so designers are custodians of the player's experience. Boy, is that a responsibility. So unlike just writers of fiction and producers of movies where you can say, this is my content and I'm putting it out there for you to engage with at your leisure, where you might feel comfortable, where you do, is that we are inviting people to come in and to take risks and to feel like they can participate and interact with this. We set up these frameworks. And by setting up this framework, we have the ability to reset the parameters of reality, which is frightening, right? It's fantastic and wonderful, but it means that we can reimagine, and in order to do that, it requires people to feel that they are both able to do so, and that there's a trust that's around. And one of the things that happened to Ben and I when we were in Scandinavia this year is that we finally came to this fundamental notion that a lot of American game communities are not built on trust because American games are not built on trust. And so we were trying to figure out how come Alibi works in Scandinavia and doesn't work over here in the same way. And it's never going to work in the same way because they're two different cultures, but there's a big difference. So design is intentional and it's not chance. You can't leave things open, or you create a vacuum that people will fill with their own assumptions and their own ideas. And that means that it's open to interpretation, and if you don't state it, you end up as an organizer always reacting instead of proactively driving an ethos or a design that you really want people to experience and create. And so you have to create this social contract, and I know it's not all about systems, and I know the systems have to be tested. And the thing about LARP that's different than fiction is you have to think about how those iterate. All right. So thinking about that is, what does your design allow? What can you do, right? What does your design encourage? What does it want you to do, right? What is your design reward? These things do not always align. All right. So you say things that you're allowed to do this, but I punish you for doing it. All right? What does your design privilege? And if you don't say what your design privilege is, it will privilege out-of-game things. Okay. What does your design on the other side discourage, or prohibit outright, or punish, or protect? Right? So your design can allow things like choosing your own gender, but it might actually not have any examples of anyone who is not binary male or female within the world. All right, so those things are in conflict with each other. So here it is, time to magic circle, right? I don't think, have we had it in the conference yet? But oh good, see, there we go. I'm gonna do time to Goffman too in this one.
Yes.
Just so we get there. Very quickly, obviously we know that the magic circle establishes this alibi that once we step inside it, we've left the real world behind. It's bullshit, right? The magic circle can so often turn into the toxic toxic circle where we suddenly reinforce things and think that we're inside this little bubble and it's all going to be okay because we all said it was. And so, to move beyond that, we wanted to think about player-centered design for empathy. All right? And now this requires metagaming, right? Or this other term that we might try to throw out for it. And by empathy, we don't mean this. We don't mean player to character. That exists. We know that exists, right? That happens when you read a book. It happens when you go to a movie. There's all kinds of studies that show about that you, the person, can see things through the eyes of a character, right? And when you role play, you, the person, can begin to empathize with the character and do something other than yourself. It's still about you, all right? But what we're talking about is that this happens, it's going to happen, it's built into LARP, right? That exists. But what can happen with that is that you can then get actionable empathy through the role of the character. You can then decide to take action so that you then begin to empathize with other players and empathize then with a community. So it's not about you to the character, it's about you through the character thinking about other people that you are co-creating with. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that requires this idea of dual consciousness, which has often been referred to as the player and the character, existing simultaneously within. That requires, though, this idea that the player is never abdicated. Oh my. All right? If I don't get to say, it wasn't me, it was my character, what does that mean? So, fancy word by association, right, which comes, is used in the Mansala, Saida, and Stenrose article about steering, which says that we stay in a state where we still recognize that we are the player, even while we are the character. And this is not metagaming, and this is not cheating, and this is not bad. This is the way it is. So, these things may seem to be strange if we are believing in the idea that that doesn't happen, that we leave behind our primary selves and exist only as the character. But it also can come in conflict with some other texts of LARP theory, particularly the notion of alibi. Right? But there are other things in LARP theory that helps us recognize that we know that this does exist. So for example, everyone thinks about my LARP filter, right? And so my LARP filter says that I can notice that that's a modern bathroom over there, even though I'm playing this medieval LARP, and I just kind of filter that out, right? Or that I can notice that that's a modern medical kit over here, and that doesn't really fit the period, but that's not really changing my immersion for the game. So the fact that I can enact a LARP filter demonstrates that I am in a bisociated state. Steering also corroborates this notion of a bisociated state. So steering says that I, as a player, can make choices that will improve my game or potentially improve the game for others, that will get me the game that I want, that will allow me to perhaps move myself towards or away from kinds of play that I want to engage in. So steering can be something as simple as, I need to go to the bathroom, and so I'm going to steer myself away from this thing so that I can get over here and take care of that. It can be, I want to find my significant other, right? And so I'm going to steer until I can find them, even though I don't really have a character reason to do so, perhaps. It can also mean that I steer myself toward drama, right, that I want to participate in. It can mean that I steer myself away from something that I want to participate in. If, and this is a big if, you are not under a trigger. Because if you have been triggered in the sense of having a trauma intrusion and not merely having a moment of that has affected me personally and I need to calm myself for a moment, but I am actually experiencing a trauma intrusion, you can't steer. You've been hit by a Mack truck and you're holding on for the ride. And the idea that that you can steer in that sort of situation forgets the core bone component at the beginning about players or people and assuming that they can steer in all situations. So if you believe in steering, and if you believe in the LARP filter, you're already existing in the bi-associated state that's required in order to play for empathy. Okay, so here's Goffman. This is the heart of play. A lot of people will say, what you're talking about ruins the game. It ruins play, right? You're asking me to think about these sorts of things. Well, Goffman says that when we play, we actually adjust our behavior depending on who we're playing with, right? And so if we are we'll use an animal example, the big daddy lion, right? And we are playing with the cubs. Do we take them out? Right? We could, right? We could exercise the more extreme power that we would have. Or you'd play at a level that's with the cubs in order to actually develop them and learn some things from the interactions so that they become stronger, better. But you're observing who's in front of you and you're calibrating your play based on their needs and their abilities. And so the idea here is that switching, Goffman says, often occurs during play, whereas one will be more dominant and one will be more submissive in play as their things are traded off, and that it isn't always about one demonstrating the dominance or using all of the resources that they might have. So if you're going to have Alibi and agree that it isn't the player but the character that's making choices, speaking and taking actions, then you have to have trust. And the word alibi in the United States gets used in legalistic terms, right? What's your alibi? Which is your justification for what you were doing or why it wasn't you. Why you couldn't possibly be accused of something because you have this alibi that's unshakable or plausibly denied, right? That wouldn't be proven. And so we use alibi in that sense, not in the sense of this gives me permission to do something that we all agree to because we trust each other. We use it to, I am unaccountable or infallible for this reason of alibi. And without the community of trust that's underneath it, alibi becomes a legalistic term that is used to break community and to break empathy. So you can have a game that ostensibly seeks to examine problematic social elements, and either by design or by the enactment of the play by the players, instead reinforces them. The game can become an excuse or an alibi to perform destructive or abusive or problematic behaviors that are rewarded and incentivized in the game, and therefore, not only do they discourage empathy, they can actually actively teach players not to feel it. It's scary. So if you're going to have a community of trust, you have to design it, right? You can't just leave it up to chance. So this I'm going to go through really fast. Numero Metze Scola is a feminist game design, and it's a queer game design. And in that, what it means is, and I'll just let it go quickly, is that we consider things like player needs, that we are actively trying to promote intersexual identities and subvert traditional power structures, that we are trying to have not only representation but performativity, that we're trying to have it align between before the game, during the game, and after the game, between the game documents, between the ethos, between the code of conduct, between what action we take with the code of conduct. So it's a tall order. And I know that's what many people in this room are also trying to do. And I know you know how difficult it is. So you have to have alignment, and you have to maintain mindfulness. So how do you know this is working? So here's an example that happened while we were here at the conference. Some players in our game who are doing online gaming, which is a problem all in itself. Because they're role-playing, text-based online, they don't know each other yet. We haven't had a chance to establish some of the community of trust. Things are misinterpreted online, there's all those sorts of things. But they're role-playing online, and because they have seen some actual enactment of boundaries and enforcement of those boundaries in online spaces that we operate, to the point of losing players before the game who wouldn't back down and who wouldn't understand that what they were saying was hurtful. They begin to enact boundaries in the role play. And we hear from folks who are playing villains or harsh characters who said to us, we're concerned that the particular demographic for your game is socially fragile and vulnerable and is not going to be able to handle role play. And so we said, what happened? And so what happened was somebody enacted a boundary and said, I consented to this role play. And it crossed a line for me. And so I let you know, this crossed the line. I don't consent to it to go any further. And the villain said, that's my job. My job as the villain. And we said, we need villains. We need people to bring conflict into games. We need people to react against. And you as a villain have an even more important job to do that with mindfulness, right? And to stay in that bi-associated state where you are watching the reactions that you are having. And that when someone enacts that to you, that isn't you saying, oh, now they can't handle it, oh, they need mollycoddling, oh, they can't do, oh, now I'm not allowed to play. No, this is exactly what's supposed to happen. And the interesting and ironic part is, they begin asking for the same things that the people who originally were asking for them were asking for, and they're missing each other, they're crossing each other, right? And so, of course, we listened to these concerns and took them as legitimate and went through and tried to explain and to understand, and didn't tell them that they were silly for having those feelings. I mean, this is many times that they've been in a situation of privilege, and they're having pushback for the first time. Was that a 1? Oh, I think I'm done. So you have to have responsibility for yourself and simultaneously the responsibility for others. These two things are not mutually exclusive, and you should lark the change you wish to see.